Welcome to Disruptive Adventism. My name is Jose Briones, and I'll be your host for this podcast. This podcast is about discussing the polemical statements and practices that are part of the Adventist fabric, which in turn shape this belief system to be unique and relevant for today's society. During today's podcast, we will be having a discussion following up on our topic on animal care with avid runner and animal lover, Paul Turner. So thanks for listening, and without any more preambles, let us begin. Paul, welcome to the podcast. Thank you for coming and for spending time with us discussing animal care and the implications about it. Before we start, just give us a little bit about yourself. What are you doing right now? What will you be doing in the future? And what are some of the runs that you'll be participating in the coming months?
Well, so I am an avid runner, as you've already alluded to. I love animals. I've had several different animals at times in my life. I am studying in the seminary right now at Andrews University and will be working as a pastor in the not so distant future.
Awesome. That's good to hear, and I'm glad that you love animals because that's going to be our topic for today. So let's transition into our first question. And this first question is very important. Why is it valid, or why is it relevant? Why is it important to take care of animals nowadays?
I think that this topic is valid because I believe animals were made in the image of God just as humanity was made in the image of God. And per that fact, animals dignify certain respect and treatment just as we do.
So you said that is a fact that animals were created in the image of God. When most of us read the Genesis account or the text, we hear or we kind of understand that God created humans in the image of God. How is it that animals as well have this image of God in them? How do they resemble it?
And of course, there has to be a distinction that's made. Of course, humanity was made in the image of God in a special sense. But I believe that because animals were made with the same amount or the same quality of perfection as humanity, they necessarily dignify respect and love and proper treatment and so forth. And if you look at the text in Genesis chapters 1 and 2, there's, especially in chapter 1, it mentions how the animals came forth from the land.
Okay.
And we came forth from the land.
Interesting.
And then also at the beginning of chapter 2 and verse 4, it talks about how the author is giving a summary of the creation of the heavens and the earth. And it ties in the creation of humanity with the creation of plants and rocks and animals and so on and so forth. So there's a kinship between humanity and the, let's say, lower life forms.
Interesting point. Now, aside from the text, let's leave a little bit aside, like the Bible. Why are animals then, why do they deserve respect? Do they have any innate qualities that they also deserve this treatment, this ethical treatment?
And there's a lot of debate concerning whether animals have feelings, and all, they get really technical. I think that just per the fact that they are things that were created by God, we were given dominion over them, and that dominion means that we're to care for them and provide for them. I think that alone says how we should respect and we should treat them and care for them. That alone. So whether or not you think that animals have feelings or, I don't have to get into all that. You should just treat all of creation with respect.
Not only animals, but humans and
plants. You should even treat rocks with respect.
Very interesting. Very interesting that you noticed that. Now, that's part of the ideological section, right? That's kind of like an ideology. But how can we take care of animals? I mean, you're saying that we have dominion over them. But how is it that we actually take care of them? I mean, if we have this dominion, if we kind of need to present some sort of ethical behavior towards them, what are some practical ways that we can do that?
There are at least 3 different ways I can think of, and there are probably infinitely more different ways you can do it. You can help animals by the way you eat with your diet. You can advocate for better treatment of animals on farms or in cattle and dairy industries. You can also advocate for animal rights, for certain environmental sanctuaries. There's a lot of different things you can do to advocate and defend the rights of animals.
So animals deserve to be treated correctly or be treated ethically because they're created in the image of God. And by our diet and by the way that we protect their sanctuaries, like their environments, those are some ways that you're proposing to.
And also another one, a side one, how you choose to entertain yourself with a gun when it comes to animals. There's another one, but that's another side issue.
That may be a different side issue for another time. Yeah. But yes, hunting and animal treatment can come into all of those areas. Now, when we come to this, there's one specific one that as Adventists we tend to practice, and this one is vegetarianism / veganism, right? Mm-hmm. We don't usually eat animals, or Adventists in general, we believe that a plant-based diet is better for you. It's healthier, not even just within Adventism, but as a whole in society. Society's moving towards that plant-based diets, or a way of meat, or maybe meat in moderation. Mm-hmm. Do you think that there's this strong feeling towards, should all Adventists be vegetarian / vegans? I mean, if you hold towards this activist, we talked about in the last podcast, activist values. Mm-hmm. Do you hold to this animal care values? I mean, these are things that Adventism holds dear. Mm-hmm. This idea of taking care of creation, human, animal, plant, rocks, as you said. Mm-hmm. Should we change our diet? Should all Adventists change their diet? And if so, why?
That's a very complicated question. The general answer I will give is yes, but with nuances.
Okay.
I take into consideration when I say yes, I realize that one, and here there's many things I acknowledge when it comes to this particular issue of veganism versus meat eating. One, I do not believe that it's immoral to eat meat. God clearly gave provision for humanity to eat meat. And I know in some situations around the world, it's not as possible for people to be strictly vegan for health concerns, the lack of resources, so on and so forth. So for those of us who have the means and live in situations where it is possible, I believe that we should be doing our utmost to adopt as close as possible a plant-based diet or vegan diet.
Now, is this for health reasons, or is it because of the argument that you presented that animals are part of creation?
Yes, it's for moral reasons, spiritual reasons, health reasons. They're all interconnected for me. I was a wellness major, so we learned that all different facets of life, they all interact and influence one another. So I believe that how we treat animals also does come out in how we choose to eat. And I do believe we as Adventists have had, we've had 150 years or however long it's been since we first received light about better health choices, and many of us are still struggling to do those things. And the world's, quite frankly, they're beating us at what should have been our own game.
So you're saying that Adventism is kind of tied to this idea of health, to this idea of kind of vegetarianism, veganism, plant-based diet. How is that tie? I mean, besides kind of Ellen White or prophetic, how does that tie? Is it intrinsic? Is it extrinsic? How should it be practiced?
Well, part of my understanding of Adventism, my understanding of the Great Controversy, which is our theme, our framework, is that in this great controversy battle that's going on, war that's going on, God is trying to get Earth essentially back to its Edenic state. And what we as Adventists have the ability to do is point people toward Jesus Christ's coming, after which point he's going to restore the earth to its Edenic state. And part of that, as Adventists looking forward to that blessed hope of returning to that Edenic state, is practicing Eden right now. So that means we should be realigning our diets to the Edenic state because that's where we're heading. And if you look at early Adventist pioneers' beliefs concerning diet, that was their drive for their adoption of healthier living, vegetarianism, as it developed over time. They were thinking, well, Jesus Christ is coming again. I need to be in the best body and mind and spirit so that I can win people to Jesus Christ and prepare them for the return back to paradise.
Interesting. So you're saying that we need to turn back towards that Edenic ideal.
Yes.
So the Edenic ideal will be to eat fruits, right?
Fruits, nuts, grain. It's basically you're eating a plant-based diet.
Plant-based diet, but it's important that we. Is that it? Is that just? Is it just about eating?
Oh no, I mean, if you want to, you can get very wide and broad about this issue, and you won't be wearing certain clothing because it came about because of animal cruelty, or you won't use certain products because the animal cruelty. Some of the products I use around my house, I've replaced them with stuff I've seen that says there's no animal cruelty involved,
right?
Because I want to.
So it's not only necessary as an Adventist to just I don't eat meat. It's not just what I eat, but it's like, hey, maybe the fabrics that you use, or maybe like the things that I know it sounds a little bit extremist. It sounds a little bit crazy to a certain degree. But how is that relationship, or how you have changed this in your house? Like your house started to become more vegan per se, right? Vegan-ish, right? But how has that impacted your living?
Well, and this. It's going to be difficult to tie it into just specifically with animals, but my consideration for animals and for the fact that we live in a larger world where it's not just us humans, it's also plants and animals and so forth, that will influence how do I use my water around the house, or how often do I run the electricity? Am I leaving the air on during the day? Do I blast my refrigerator on high? There's so many different things you can do, and it comes back to that understanding that we have dominion over the earth. We have a responsibility to take care of the earth. All of it derives from that.
So you're saying that this has impacted you because it has changed the way that you think.
Yeah.
Now, emotionally, maybe psychologically, and maybe spiritually, how has that shifted?
It gives me a greater sense of, maybe it sounds a little, this might sound a bit much, but it gives me a greater sense of that Edenic oneness with the rest of creation.
Right.
I was reading in Romans, I'm stumbling to remember the chapter right now, but it says that the whole of creation groans and waits for the redemption of the sons.
Right, at the start in chapter 1 and 2, like you already have that
exactly.
idea, yeah.
So we are the first fruits of the redemption of the earth. So we are what God is doing in humanity, in believers, how he's transforming us and bringing us to the Edenic state. That is a first fruits picture of what he's going to do with the rest of humanity. And so that when I take care of the earth, when I take care of animals and have a consideration for their needs, I'm constantly being reminded that I'm a steward of the earth and I have a connection with the earth that God put me in.
Now, as you have treated animals, as you have changed the way that you think about animals, has that changed the way that you think about, not only other plants and rocks, but creatures like people?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting question.
Because what I'm trying to say is that, when I see how people treat their dogs, right? They treat them with a lot of affection and love, very positive feelings. It's very seldom that we hit our dogs, but I see more perpetrations of hitting people,
yeah.
and so it's kind of like there's more crimes against humanity than crimes against animals to a certain degree.
Oh yeah.
But how has this relationship between you and animals allowed you to behave more ethically towards all of the other creation?
One thing that when I grew up, I didn't have like a dog or anything like that. Some people think guys should have these big burly dogs. That's I had growing up. I had how many? I think it was like 5 or 7 guinea pigs, and I had a rabbit.
Okay.
And taking care of those little animals that that had been domesticated, they couldn't take care of themselves in the wild. So I would keep them in my house and I would take care of them, and it taught me gentleness. It taught me respect for small things. And you can see in just how my little rabbit or my or my guinea pigs, the way they depended for their alfalfa or their pellets or their cage to be cleaned, it reminded me of how, God takes care of us and how he tenderly watches out over us. So how he exercises his compassionate dominion over us. I got to in turn exercise dominion over these creatures, and I believe that growing up, that gave me a tenderness that maybe a lot of people don't have. I don't know. I don't think I'm super special, but it definitely has taught me to try to be kind. It's not always easy, but
right.
It definitely teaches me to have a concern for people who maybe can't look out for themselves as well.
That's very interesting. Yeah, because animals, at least we have understood, or science has kind of like, gave us this conception that animals may not be able to think in the same way that we are able to think, right? They're not able to communicate in the same language that we're able to communicate, even though they still communicate as between themselves, right? And we may not understand all of that in the same way that they may not understand all the things. But it's very interesting that you mentioned this tenderness, this things that you have acquired towards other people because of your treatment of how you treat animals. Now, one other area that interests me about you is that you have gone a couple of times to the Navajo Nation in New Mexico, right?
Yes.
And this time around, Navajo people, has it taught you something different? I mean, they are not Adventists. They're different than Adventists are, but they may hold to certain similar practices. How was that time, or has that time influenced you as to how you see animals?
One thing you can notice from a lot of Native people cultures in the United States is that traditionally they have held great respect for animals. There's a book on my shelf called the DA5, and it gives the Navajo creation account. And it's very fascinating to read how a large majority of the divine beings that created the world, or the angelic beings, are described as animals. And these are the creatures, or these are the divine beings, that the Navajo people worshipped and venerated. And because they held animals in such high regard, it would influence the way they treated them. And you can see this again throughout all kind of Native people cultures, historically speaking. They've treated animals a lot more humanely, for lack of a better word, than Westerners have tended to do so. And being out there, seeing how they interact with nature, it is fascinating. You have and I don't want to sound like I'm stereotyping them, because I'm not at all, but they just simply do have a greater sense of respect for Mother Earth, let's say that.
That's very interesting that you say that, because to regard the creatures of the ground, like the animals, as deities, right? Like it's very different than how we see them, or how we have been trained to see them, and it kind of speaks to the Edenic creation account, right? Like or what we believe to be true, that hey, all creation is kind of similar. We share these things. One more question that kind of comes to my mind as we're starting to wrap up the podcast is like, if humans are so much better, right? Like let's take away a little bit of all of the Bible and all of those accounts that kind of say how the world started, and let's go to a more scientific paradigm, right? The whole evolution kind of idea. If we're animals ourselves, how does that relate towards the treatment that we're giving animals?
So last year I took an ethics class, and it was just an intro class, but we got to study about evolutionary ethics. And I totally agree that people who espouse evolutionary views can definitely have morals and ethics, and even properly treat animals. One thing that I've struggled with is how as you had pointed out earlier, how an evolutionary mindset can lead to this understanding, this huge, like this big distinction between humanity and animals that's unhealthy, to the point where it doesn't matter how we treat quote unquote lower life forms, because we're the dominant, we're the ones who evolved the best, we're the ones, survival of the fittest kind of thing. and it can be very unhealthy. And I think that the way that we treat animals in this society is actually, in some ways, the result of kind of those evolutionary ideas. Certainly, things like racism stem from that, and so forth.
So you're saying that
Eugenics.
this kind of scientific paradigm has allowed us humans, because we're the highest kind of form of animalia, to put ourselves over something that we're not supposed to put ourselves. Something that, like the same creation, we're all created, we all are in the same level playing field. So you're kind of...
Well, I would say we are certainly more important. We're more valuable than animals because we were made in the image of God in a special sense, and they don't bear that image exactly in the same way as us. For instance, we're able to make ethical and moral decisions. We're able to make future plans. They can't do that. There's so many different things that puts us in a different class, but there is a certain, to a certain extent, you can overemphasize that distinction to the point where you will no longer respect those quote unquote lower life forms in the way they should be respected because you think too much of yourself. And a good way to look at this is, even though God is in an infinitely greater class than we are, we can't even begin to compare to him, he doesn't use his difference of class as a grounds to mistreat us.
So you're saying that he comes down, he helps us.
Exactly.
That kind of same treatment we should do to animals.
Exactly.
Well, good thoughts. As we start wrapping up, what are some of the ways, like, to kind of like, how can we just, we have collected all of this information, we have discussed about a couple of things, but how can we just, maybe today make a decision, make a choice to live more ethically towards not only animals, but towards all of creation? What are some ideas that you can have?
I think one of the easiest, maybe easy is not the best word actually, but one of the best ways and most immediate ways we can help animals, help all of creation in that, for that matter, is by changing your diet. And especially as Adventists, that's a no-brainer. That should be a no-brainer, especially for those of us who have the means, have the resources, are in a situation where we can do so. Adopting a plant-based diet, looking at the counsel we receive from Jesus through Ellen White, and so on and so forth. Changing your diet, not letting your desire for meat or things that are not as positive for the earth be the driving thing for how you eat or how you clothe yourself or so forth. So that's at least one way you can do that.
Well, thank you very much for your thoughts. It's been a great podcast. I mean, I've enjoyed it. Discussion with you is always good. Final thoughts about this topic. What are some of the things that you can think to give?
Just remember, like what it says in Romans, that we are the first fruits of creation unto God. And another thing, we were made to be the stewards of the earth. And what God is doing in our lives as believers, transforming us, bringing us back to the Edenic state, bringing us back to be like Jesus. God wants to do that same work in the earth. He wants to begin that work, I believe, now, but he wants to do it through us. And as Adventists, as Christians, we have the ability to surrender some of the ways that we have been living that have not been as positive for animals, for the earth, and begin to live differently and to be better stewards for a better future for the world.
That was our discussion on animal care with avid runner and animal lover Paul Turner. Thanks for listening today. We hope that we have intrigued you a little bit and that you decide to stay around for future podcasts. If you have any comments, feedback, or a topic you would like us to discuss, please go to our website at www.disruptiveadventism.org or shoot us an email to disruptiveadventism@gmail.com. We're eager to engage in any discussions about any matter, so don't hesitate to contact us. This has been it for today. We hope you join us next time, and as always, we invite you to be disruptive.